Many people around
On right now.
Okay. So if they log on. Okay. Great. Well, hi everyone. You all know my name's Katie. We already kind of got that out of the way. It's so nice to meet you all. Like I said, I'm kind of glad it's a small group, but Stephanie is recording this, so you'll have the information to keep as well. I'll pull my mask down for just a moment so you can see my face. This is me. We do this and we work with a lot of kids, and we do that pretty much everywhere, just so they can see our face. But I'm so glad that you all made the time to come tonight for this workshop on grief and how it relates to your children with Down syndrome. And we at Fernside, I'll kind of talk about our history, but first I want to share with you what brought me to Fernside. I've been at Fernside for about 10 years, but I'm still in my first year as a staff member, so I call it a promotion of a lifetime. I came to Fernside 10 years ago when my dad died unexpectedly. I was 14, and after 2 years of going through the peer support groups, I started volunteering. So I felt called to the mission. Went to Ohio University, didn't know what I wanted to do when I graduated, but knew if I came back to Cincinnati that I wanted to be a part of Fernside. So finally, that moment came to work there last January, so it's really an honor to continue the mission of our founder, Rachel, who I'll introduce you to in a moment, and kind of talk about grief, what I do every day. So I will go to the next slide. So I'll give you a little bit of Fernside's history. We're actually celebrating 35 years next week, so this is a monumental time for us. This is our founder, Rachel. Our anniversary is December 16th because Fernside started with 16 kids. So Rachel and her husband, Paul, started Fernside when their son, David, died unexpectedly. David, he was a young adult when he died, but he went to Walnut Hills High School, and he was unfortunately hit by a bike as a young adult. He was riding his bike and got hit, but when he was a kid, when he went to Walnut High School, Rachel used to pick him up from a street that's perpendicular to the school, and that street is called Fernside. So some families actually go on little field trips and go find the street, go find Fernside Street. We don't sell ferns. I've actually gotten a call like that in the last year. You know, we don't sell flowers, no, nothing like that. But this is Rachel, and we always start every discussion or presentation or tour in our office with introducing people to Rachel. She's the first face you see when you come into our office. So this is her legacy. In 2002, we actually became part of Hospice Cincinnati. So we were an affiliate of Hospice first. The reason for that was just because we had a family that came through our program that had benefited from hospice, and they saw, like Jim and I, we were just talking about collaboration, they saw the opportunity to collaborate. And then hospice, somewhere down the line, became part of TriHealth. So there's like TriHealth up here, and then there's hospice, and then there's like a little pocket of grief services, and we're included in that. So the difference between our affiliation with hospice, and there are grief services in hospice, and we're considered under that wheelhouse, but we serve the general public. But our partners who are also that do grief services for hospice, they really only serve families that go through the hospice system. So we do collaborate with them, but we are open to the public. So there's a little bit of a difference there. So we're really going to talk about the developmental stages of grief today. So the next hour, some of this content will be kind of heavy, but I am going to relate it into the work that we've done with children and adults with developmental disabilities. And I am going to leave you with some practical things that you can hopefully do at home. Things that are good for expressing our feelings and different things like that. And I'll also talk about some of our services and how we can collaborate with the Down Syndrome Association, because I think, like I was saying at the beginning, this is a great opportunity for us to identify the need, and hopefully we can do support groups here. So there's also an opportunity to attend our evening program, but we'll talk through what those different options are. And before I dive into this content too, I know everyone, I know that your daughter is 17, right? And everyone's kind of a different age, at a different part of the spectrum. spectrum. So when we talk about those with developmental disabilities, it's kind of like, where do you fit in the spectrum of the developmental ages, right? Like you could have Down syndrome and be 30, but maybe you're really functioning at like a 15-year-old. Does that make sense? So these developmental stages go from ages 3 to 18. I'll also talk about general adult grief. A lot of this transcends into adulthood. So these stages are going to talk about what we've seen working with children for 35 years. But I just want to encourage you to think about it into adulthood, or what age do you think your child kind of fits into these pieces? Kind of like a puzzle. So one of the best things about Fernside, and you'll see with this picture up here, is we get to express our feelings sometimes not only by saying it, but doing it, creating it. So if your child likes to do artwork, Macy, you were saying that your daughter had included things about her grandfather in her writing or different things like that. How can we expand on that and make that part of the healing process? Doing hands-on activities. Kids at any age, and those with developmental disabilities can have a hard time verbally like understanding what each feeling is. One of the things we do at Fernside is we always meet a child where they're at, or any individual. We want to meet you where you're at, find you the support that you need. So I'll talk about that as I go through the stages. So the first stage is infants and early childhood, which is ages 0 to 5. We call these our littles, or our squirrels. They get a little squirrely sometimes. But there's really no concept of death at this age. And when there's no concept of death, it can be really hard to understand what's happening when someone dies. We always refer to it as the person who died. Each person has a special relationship, but we don't assume that every relationship that someone has with their person was a loving one. So that's why we don't say that it was their loved one. It's always their person who died. That way we leave all the assumptions aside. There's a lot that goes into this age group just about like keeping consistency with their environment, what's going on around them. I've actually got some great book recommendations for this age group too, just trying to understand what death is, ways that we can do that, and ways that we've done that in some of our support groups. Our DPS groups is like, we always talk about death in real terms. So we use terms like this person died. We talk to a lot of adults who are hesitant when you're talking to a child about death to actually use those terms. We encourage that because it helps them actually understand the process. One way to do that too is talk about, okay, when someone dies, there's so many different ways that can happen. What's a way? Are you okay? Uh-huh. Thank you. Yeah, so we know when someone dies that their heart stops beating. So put your hand on your heart and you feel that. And then when your heart stops beating, that's when someone dies. So we talk about death in very real terms at every age group. How adults choose to talk about death with their child is ultimately up to them. But we do consultations as well where we consult people on how to talk about it, and meeting each child where they're at on the developmental stage. But like I said, we always talk about it in very real terms. But schedule is really important for early childhood, just like staying on a routine. And I will say, it depends on the child too, but routine is really good for this age group and the next age group too. And you all know your child best. So if you know that your child is better on a routine and they need to wake up at the same time and they need to eat breakfast at the same time, then those are things when someone dies that you should really stick with. And that way, there's an expectation. Like, I know this is going to happen. When someone dies, it feels so unknown and it kind of like overcomes you and you have all the feelings, but having something that's steady and consistent is very helpful. So early childhood, they usually like to like play out what death is. So you might see kind of like some interactive play even with other kids. We hear things about kids being at school and talking about death with other kids or interacting about like, here, let me show you how my person died, and then they'll like interact and like show you how it happened. That can be scary depending on the cause of death, but it's just how they're processing it. They don't know how to process it, and that's really the easiest way to say it. They don't know how to process it. So it's important, and I'll repeat this for every age group, but it's important to have role models, which is what all of you are here for, right? Like it's learning how can I be a role model for my child and meet them where they're at and give them what they need so that they can heal. So, like I said, a lot of things we can do. Keep routines normal. We do see a lot of regressive behaviors at this during this age group when someone dies, like wetting the bed, doing things that maybe it was an old habit, but now they're getting back into it. So just kind of, that's why consistency is key here, just keeping on a schedule. And another thing is they really view death as temporary. So they don't understand that when someone dies, and that's why I gave that example, I think people get fearful to talk about death, and that's the way I've heard it in a lot of consultations with people. And no one wants their child to be sad, but at some point in your life, you're going to grieve, and that's why we have to teach them what that process looks like. Because if they don't learn it while it's happening, and you don't help them understand what's happening then, they'll find out another way, or they'll find out later in their life, and it's just better for them to find out why, while it's happening. And good things to do, even at a young age, it's always up to the adult or the parent, but going to a funeral, it's part of the grieving process. It's part of memorializing the person and going through those processes. So we encourage all of those things, but giving simple factual information too is important. I think sometimes we can over-explain that, but like I was giving that example of like, put your hand on your heart. When your heart stops beating. So we can really kind of make it simple, make it super simple. If your child likes to draw, one thing that I do in a lot of groups is draw me an emoji of how you're feeling. If you're feeling sad, can you draw that? You always have that option, and I think it obviously depends on the abilities of your child. But if you think about where they're at and what's something they like to do, how do you tie that in when you start to talk about their feelings and ways to identify their feelings? Because identifying their feelings is also an important part of this process. A lot of times they don't know what these feelings are. I think sometimes just as adults too, like we don't know what these feelings are, right? You're like, I'm feeling all the things right now, but how can I go through and just identify, like, here's my sadness, here's my anger, here's my, all those different steps. So, like I said, keep routines normal. You're all the role models too. And sometimes it's okay to be flexible when setting limits. I usually get a lot of questions on this bullet point because there's like a fine line between a lot of parents who are like, well, my child's grieving, but they did this thing that they don't normally do, and it wasn't appropriate. But do I discipline them, or do I just like let it happen because I know that they're grieving? And you as parents all know best, but I'd say this, especially if it's something not appropriate, then discipline needs to happen so that they know that's not okay. But we can give them some grace in those moments too, and that's going to be acknowledging that you know how to communicate with your children. Acknowledge that they're going through a really hard time. I know that you're really struggling because grandpa died or dad died. But that doesn't mean that you can act out in this kind of way. Does that make sense? So that's ages 0 to 5. And we actually, I'll talk about it a little more in middle childhood. We have a summer camp program. And we had a little girl come this year who had Down syndrome, and she just had the time of her life. She just had such a great time. She participated in our virtual group too. We've been doing virtual for almost 2 years, which is just crazy. But she just had a great time. And we've actually had a small handful of children with Down syndrome participate in the virtual groups. We've utilized the chat feature and different things like that. We know that Sometimes when we're not verbally sharing, we can also learn by listening, so I think that's really helpful. So middle childhood is ages 6 to 9. This age group is more aware of what's happening when you tell them that someone's died. So they kind of know what death is. They've pieced that together. But they start to also become concerned with their surroundings. What's going on around me? My dad died. Now I'm nervous that mom might die. Those are all really normal things that we see. And they just get so worried that something else in their environment might change. So you'll hear me keep going back to staying consistent and having something that they can look forward to that feels steady and normal, because their feelings all of a sudden don't feel normal. They know that something's off. They may or may not feel comfortable expressing feelings verbally. A good activity, I was just talking about like feelings and talking about how we identify those feelings. We sometimes like to bring candy to our groups, and it's always big hit. So candy or something like that. One example is Skittles. Take a bag of Skittles and divide the Skittles by color, and then maybe assign every Skittle a color. So like your red Skittle, maybe you're mad. Your yellow Skittle, you're sad. Your green Skittle, you're happy. And that could be a way to work through expressing feelings. So tell me anger. And again, you each know the abilities of your child. So a way that you would do that, or it doesn't have to be Skittles, it could just be the color. But tell me a time that you were angry or related to the death. Tell me what makes you mad about the death. Tell me, do you feel happy? I mean, not that they died necessarily, but it's sometimes we hear kids say that, because again, we don't assume that every relationship was loving. Or one could even just be a memory, like tell me a memory about the person. One thing we know about individuals and kids too is when they start, and I keep referring back to our conversation that you said Jenna was starting to like, it's coming to the surface, which means she needs to talk about it. When they start talking about it, or when they start asking questions, that means it's time to talk about it and find ways to support them, which is what you're all doing now. But some people like to kind of like scoot that aside because it feels uncomfortable, or maybe you're grieving too and it just feels so hard for you. But because they're talking about it, it means that they need to talk about it. So this age group too, sometimes you might have, your child might have just gone right back to a normal, they just acted like nothing happened. You told them that so-and-so died, and they're like, okay, I'm going to go back to whatever I was doing. And that can be really confusing for parents or legal guardians, because you're like, well, that's not normal. Shouldn't they be crying? Shouldn't they be sad? It's just every child is unique. And around the winter time, we like to just prefer everyone to be like a snowflake, like all the snowflakes on the wall back there. Like every single one is different. Everyone's different. Everyone has a different space for grieving and how they're going to do it. Just because they're ignoring it immediately doesn't mean that they're not processing it a different way. And I think it's important to just kind of let that happen too. A lot of adults get worried, like, oh, like, should I be talking to them about it? I don't know what to do, which you don't have to know what to do. No one has to know how to have a grieving child. It's not something you've ever done before. So you don't need to be an expert at this by any means. But just meet them where they're at. If they want to go sit and cry in the corner, then that can be okay. As long as they're not doing it every day. But if they need that moment, they need that moment. Or if they just want to resume normal activities, then okay, they'll come back to me when it's time to talk. Bad dreams and nightmares. I'm not sure if any of you, I'd be interested just to hear if you've all had experience with that. We see them a lot. And I've got some unique ways to like process that too. I mean, one simple one is just writing notes about things that make you happy, or drawing things that make you happy and stick them in your pillow. And then that way, before you go to bed, it's, what are happy things to make us think about happy things before we go to bed. But this comes up a ton with our kids. And it's just, I think it's because their minds are focused on it for so long, and then when you go to bed, if you had dreams before that kind of wake you up in the middle of the night, usually I can tie my dreams back to something I was thinking about that day, and you're like, that was really weird. Even if it was something I thought about for like 5 minutes, but then it like comes back to haunt me in my dreams, and that's what kids who are grieving do. They're thinking about their person, and dreams can be scary, or they can just be unsettling, or sometimes they make us happy. Sometimes we hear individuals say, I'm kind of scared to go to sleep because I know I might dream about my person. I don't really want to see them because I know when I wake up they're not going to be there anymore. Or they do want to dream because they do want to see their person. So we hear both sides of that. But I love the pillow, or like even we have little pillows. You can even like make these. You know the like tie blankets, the blankets that tie. You can make pillows like that, or even like a small one. And you can order little pillows on Amazon. The holidays might not be the best time. Amazon's probably backlogged right now. But you get like a little pillow, it can be a big pillow, and then you get that fabric, like find their favorite fabric, or they can pick it out, and then make your little tie pillow, and then like stick little notes in it. Like there's holes on the side, so you stick a note with it, and then like that's their comfort. Like that comforts them. So now not only do they have something where they're processing their feelings, but they also have a comfort item to take with them. So there's a lot of ways that we can help with this age group. Also want to mention friend and peer relationships can become really difficult too, just because kids understand more so what's happening to them. So they really can acknowledge like, okay, like and wherever your kids are at during the day, if they're in a work environment, if they're in a school environment, whichever environment they're in, they just might be recognizing that others aren't struggling the way that they are, and it just makes those relationships a little bit harder because they're like, I don't know how to talk about this, but also I feel like no one else is going through it. Which is why I keep going back to making that connection. We have peer support groups here and putting them in a space where they know that others are also grieving and are like them. I think that's the important part too, that others like them are grieving and that we can process it together. So again, keep routines as normal as possible. You'll keep seeing that come up. Encourage questions and give honest, age-appropriate answers. A lot of times, people and kids will ask questions when they're ready. We don't always have to force information upon them, but they'll ask when they're ready. Avoiding euphemisms. This one really means, it goes back to just being truthful about death and what death means. At Fernside, we are open to all abilities, all children, families, different beliefs, religious, ethnic, whatever your background is. We are, we don't make any exceptions at Fernside. Everyone's welcome at Fernside. And that's why we always talk about death in real terms, but we avoid euphemisms like daddy's an angel now, because that can be confusing. So around the holidays too, you might have an angel on the top of a Christmas tree, and it's like, okay, well, that's not dad, that's not mom. But that's why it gets so confusing. It's like saying to it, like the term like I'm as sick as a dog, but we all know that means not like I'm sick, but the dog's not sick, the dog's fine. So it just gets confusing. So just being truthful, and whatever you believe, if you believe in heaven, if you believe that you're reincarnate, whatever you believe, share that with your family, and that can be kind of what grounds you, but kind of avoid some of the things that can be really confusing. Role modeling and validating feelings, and just saying it's okay to be sad. And at Fernside, we have kids all the time who just feel all the feelings at once. Like even as an adult, you do. Like you're sad, you're happy, you're mad. Those are all okay. Just because someone died doesn't mean you can't have like a moment of happiness. We don't have to beat ourselves up for being happy for a second. Memories make us happy, or maybe you're the person who died loved ice cream, so like let's go get an ice cream cone. That'll make us happy and talk about memories. There's a lot of things that we can do to bring ourselves out of some of that heavy grief too. Think about, what's like a special treat or something that your person likes to do, and tie it into talking about memories. And if talking about memories is upsetting, then okay, we can come back to it. That's okay. Sharing memories of the person who died, so for parents or legal guardians, it's just a way for you to it makes us feel like that person is still with us, but it also lets your kids know it's okay to talk about it. And it's okay to talk about it with mom and dad. It's okay to talk about it with us. When you talk about it, you're role modeling that it's okay for your kids to talk about it. And that's really important. That way it feels like we're not shuttering those memories away because the way they died was so sad, or, the circumstance was so sad. Every circumstance is going to be sad. But if we talk about it, we're kind of bringing those memories to life. And back to kind of the euphemism, make sure they're not confused about the death or feel responsible. A lot of kids feel guilty for pretty much any kind of cause of death, suicide, car accidents, even a natural death. A lot of times they're like, what if I was there, or if I just didn't do this, or if I didn't do that. And when you hear them talk about it, you're like, that doesn't make sense because we know, you weren't there, right? And that's just how it is. And encourage them, there's nothing that you could have done, right? Maybe your sister died of cancer, and there's nothing we could have done. We did everything we can, and just validating that it's not your child's fault. I'm sure they feel guilt, or we oftentimes feel guilty that we should have spent more time, or we should have done more things. And one thing that we sometimes will do an activity where we're like, draw us a picture, or what's a memory that you would have in the future. Like, they're not here, but what's something that you want to do with them now? Or what's something that you didn't get to do with them that you would want to do with them now? We never got to go fishing. So I'm going to go fishing, or I'm going to go fishing in honor of that's something that we would have done. So, it's just good to validate that it's not their fault, clarify misunderstandings, because a lot of times kids think it's their fault, and as adults, we don't even know that they're thinking that. And we're like, oh my gosh, of course it's not your fault. I had a kid in a group the other day. Her brother ended up unfortunately getting murdered, but his friend who murdered him needed help, and in the middle of the night, he climbed out the window to go help his friend, not knowing that it was going to end poorly. But this little girl was like, oh my gosh, if I would have slept in his room that night. Well, you don't sleep in his room. That doesn't make any sense, So there's just things that don't make sense, but they're connecting those dots like, oh, I should have been there. Or what if I didn't leave the house that day? That never would have happened. Does anyone so far feel like they have a child or know someone with Down syndrome that fits into these stages so far, like 0 to 5 or the middle child, or they kind of connect with us? So late childhood is typically considered like our preteens, which are actually really fun to work with. So they actually, on our Zoom group, they did a talent show last year. And everyone was like, at first when we started doing Zoom groups, we were like, oh, I don't know about this. How is this going to go? And they just all connected so well. They have a concept of death, so they know what's going on. Peer relationships are so important for this age group as we start transitioning into high school even. They understand the ramifications of death, so knowing when someone's dying, they're not coming back, and how hard that can be to understand. And stereotypical gender roles of we see a lot of typically in boys, oh, I don't want to share my feelings because I'm embarrassed. And that's very stereotypical that guys are not supposed to share their feelings, and it's okay for girls to share their feelings, which we know is not true. So we can role model that too as adults in their lives to encourage them to share. And they also might have problems in school. So if it's coming up a lot, which Missy and I were just talking about that, if it's disrupting their schedule, whatever environment they're in, if it's if it's disrupting their everyday schedule and normal tasks that they should be able to do, then we know it's something we need to start processing differently, or we need to find some additional support. And again, peer relationships, very difficult for this age group because they just typically in a typical school setting, like if we're working with the typical child, they are pretty much like, I'm too cool for school, and like they know what's going on in their life, and they just don't want other kids to know, and they don't want other people to know. Depending on how your child communicates, it can be a different way. Like everyone's different. If they're going to talk about it a lot, if they're going to talk about it a little, but they're just really overall more aware of their surroundings. So one of the biggest things to help for this age group is just being a listener, a non-judgmental listener that's like, yep, I understand what you're saying. I got you. We do this a lot as like connecting, like I connect with you, you connect with me. We always encourage kids to share one at a time. We don't talk over each other. So if you want to make a connection with someone and it's not your turn to share, then like this, because that means we have a connection. Encourage them to express their feelings, which is so important for this age group, just to know that it's normal to feel all the feelings. When someone dies, it's so complicated to feel all these feelings at once and to even identify what they are. How do I differentiate what my anger is from my sadness? Maybe my sadness is making me angry. Maybe my anger is actually making me sad. I had a sixth grader the other day build a structure, and he was in the middle. And the middle block was yellow, which was him, and all the outside blocks were red, which was his anger, just like encompassing him. And he said, I'm so angry, but my anger turns into sadness. And then I get more angry because now I'm sad. And that's just confusing. Like, it's confusing to feel all of those things at the same time. And I would definitely anticipate a lot of questions. I don't know if any of your children have asked questions about the death and just the different ways it's affected them. But again, give honest answers. They know what's going on around them. They're very aware. So if you're not honest, honestly, they'll probably know that you're lying or not being honest because they're pretty aware. It depends on what their surroundings are too. Are they in a typical school setting around other kids who don't have Down syndrome? Do they spend most of their day with other individuals with Down syndrome? What's their typical setting? And that will kind of change the information that they probably take in and give out too. Big changes at this age group, like we see some kids, like their dad dies and now mom is like, well, we're going to move and we're going to go to a new school district. Well, sometimes that's not really the best. Definitely talk about that with your children. Like, should we put them in a different environment? Is it okay? Is it the right time? It could even be something simple, like maybe you've been going to the same church for 25 years and your child's been going to that church for 18 years of their life, and I'm like, we're going to go to a different church. Like, maybe if they have like friends in a community there, we should like keep them in that stable environment for a little bit longer until we decide that we're going to go somewhere else. And then security and stability and engaging discussion, just like positive ways to cope. One of the things we do at Fernside is we want families to be equipped with coping skills to be able to move forward in their grief. We don't want you or your children to just be stuck in this heavy parts of grief for like a really long time, 10 years, 20 years. Some people are. It's really typical that families will spend 8 to 12 months in our program. That's not a contract. That's not like a deadline or anything like that. We've actually had a lot of families in our program for the last 2 years because of COVID, and they've only done virtually. Because they've been waiting for that in-person experience. It's really important to them. But we want to equip families with the coping skills. We call it a grief toolbox, which is also another great activity that you can do, like get a little toolbox and like, what are the things that help us? Put it in the toolbox and hey, if they're going to school that day and they need to bring their grief toolbox because they can pull things out that help them, then great, it can even be like a little pencil box. It doesn't have to be an actual toolbox, but just a box that symbolizes like these are the things that help me, and have them accessible so that that kind of feels comforting to them. It can even be like a stuffed animal, um, different kinds of fidgets, their favorite pen, their favorite markers. What's just something that's going to help them in that moment, with the coping skills. But we want families to be able to move forward and be equipped with the coping skills to just live like a healthy and full life and kind of get back to your normal. A lot of families in our program, they really know when they've gotten what they needed, and it's time to take the next step, right? Like I think one of the most special parts at Fernside is being a part of people's healing process, and it's such an honor to help people do that. And there's a lot of proud moments when families decide to move forward, and you're just like, I'm so happy that you feel ready. So we want families to feel ready. We want them to be ready to move on to their next step. And adolescents, these are the teenagers. Like I said, all these stages of grief, a lot of these things transcend throughout the lifespan. As adults even, you may be reading these slides and you're like, yep, that's me. Like that was in the ages 6 to 9 slide, but I definitely identify with that bullet point. This age group has a lot of difficulty with peer relationships because they're aware that like what happens next, maybe after high school, or maybe if your child is in a school setting and they know at some point they might have to transition out of that school setting and go to a different kind of setting, and they know that at some point it's kind of like your time there will be up because you've got to transition to the next step. And there's a lot of mixed feelings about that, like leaving my friends, or if they, we work with groups that help in different like workplace settings, like a group of kids with developmental disabilities like works at La Rose's, and they like help pack. They're like the host or the hostess, and they help seat people and things like that. Or what if they switch jobs? Like what if they're not in that same spot forever? Maybe they've lived with their parents their whole life, and you get to a transitional point where they can't live with you anymore. Those are things that are probably unsettling to think about, but these are things into adolescence, into their adulthood that like they're thinking about the responsibilities and what changes when I become an adult. But we do see issues with kids with like school grades, and when they're grieving, just kind of being risk takers and doing things that they wouldn't normally do, kind of pulling away from their families because they want to be independent. They're trying to be independent. And you will know if your child has that capability or is yearning for some type of independence, even though you know that they might quite not be capable of that full independence, right? Like they depend on you in the home life. So there's a lot of things that pull them away from their family, and they think, oh, I can do all these things. I'm a big kid now. I got this. And you're like, okay, little Johnny, not quite. And we're getting ahead of ourselves. Being a listener is really important, and helping them navigate how they can grow their support system. So when death happens and affects our lives, we sometimes get hesitant to get close to people or build other relationships. But we know we need relationships to move forward too. And that's really important. So navigating that with your children and helping them navigate how they can still build on their support, but maybe helping them identify what people in their life can support them, because maybe they don't know, or maybe they're afraid to ask. So encouraging them, hey, your teacher or your aide or your classmates, they can support you too. It doesn't always just have to be mom and dad or the parents or legal guardians. There's a lot of other people that can help support them. And encouraging healthy outlets to express grief, and letting them know too that it's okay to take a break from grief. This kind of ties back into some of the earlier age groups where it's like sometimes we just revert back to like whatever we normally do, and that's okay. You don't have to be sad every day. You don't have to beat yourself up for being like, maybe I don't really feel like I'm grieving today. You might be, but you're like, sadness isn't in the forefront of my mind. It's somewhere back here, and that's okay. Maybe it's the anniversary of the person's death, and you're like, I'm not really sad today. You don't have to beat yourself up for that. That's okay. You don't have to be sad. What's another feeling that you feel though? What's a different feeling that we can identify with on those special days? So those are the developmental stages. I have a couple slides of grief reactions that we see. And so I'll just kind of run through them, but these are typical grief reactions that we see. And these are it says grief reactions in children. These are in adults too. These identify with all adults as well. Sadness and loneliness, denial, the thinking of like they're going to come back, bodily distress. We see a lot of kids like my tummy hurts. It's just their grief manifesting in a different way, but they don't really know it. Or anger is very normal, but it's actually very healthy. But the key there is how are you expressing your anger? Throwing a cup at the wall, a dish or something, and then it breaks. It's not healthy. But what's something that we could do? I actually do activities with like foam blocks. I just did it this week with some kids actually. And I drew like a target on the wall and I have to throw the foam blocks because I knew they couldn't get hurt by the foam blocks. But what's something like it's actually really important for them to release their anger. But we can do it in a safe way. I don't know, get some dodgeballs or something and throw them at the wall. What's something that won't actually hurt us, but is a really healthy way to process the emotion. Feeling guilty, in depression, feelings of helpless, apathetic, alone, withdrawn. And then assumption of mannerisms of deceased. I always find this one interesting. We see it a lot. Kids saying like, oh, I look like my dad, or I look like my brother, or wearing clothes that make them look like that person. We see this one a lot too, the idealization of the deceased. I've got a high schooler right now in a group whose mom died of cancer, and she's really struggling with the fact that when her mom was sick, everyone thought, oh, you gotta help mom, and we gotta be there, and she's such a good person, and all these things, and now she's processing, wait, my mom was actually like everyone was like idealizing her, like she was this, on top of a pyramid or the star on top of your tree, but she really wasn't, and trying to process the emotion of how difficult it was that everything got pushed aside during the time that mom was sick, and that's how people have remembered her. She was just this gem or this whatever, and then she was like, well, it's just not great of a mom. And every child has a different experience. I've worked with siblings before where one is like, I loved my mom, and the other one was like, didn't like mom. They have, and we honor both experiences. They each have a different journey, and your children will too. They each have a different experience. What you thought of the person is different than what your child will. Anxiety and fear, panic, regression, and then school problems. So I've actually got printouts of the PowerPoint too, so I'll give those to each of you to take so that you'll have this list. It kind of just helps so that when these come up, you're like, okay, like, check that. Like, this is normal. Like, I don't have to feel like the way that my child is acting right now is just like not okay. Like, it just helps kind of to have the reassurance that these are normal things that they can be feeling. These are just some really good things to remember. You can't fix grief. You can't. Everyone experiences it differently. Like I said, each child is different, like the snowflakes on the wall. We're all different, but you can't fix it. And I think that's the hard part for parents, is you don't want your child to be sad and you don't want them to face this adversity. You don't want it to disrupt the schedule that you've worked so hard to maintain with them, all of those other challenges that you face. And this is like the one thing that you're like, oh, if I could just change it or take it away from them, and you can't. But I want you to know that it's really healthy for them to go through this grief process, to find others who are grieving, which is something that Fernside can help with, and help you find resources to do that. There's no time limit on grief. Grief goes throughout the lifespan. I lost my dad in 2009, and I still grieve. Different parts of your life change, and your grief will like resurface. Or I saw an article about how someone was buying like bananas at the grocery store, and they were just like overcome with sadness because they used to go grocery shopping with their person that died. And this holiday season, especially, things might come up where you're like, oh, we used to do that, right? Like there was a memory, we used to do that. Well, we can create new memories, or we can honor the old ones. I'm looking at the Christmas trees here in the back. One thing you could do is like, let's make an ornament, like for the person. They could draw a picture and stick it inside the ornament, like a glass one. Any way they want to decorate it. Put a picture of their person. It's just a way we can remember those people in a different way. Each child's unique, even within the same family. I mentioned that each child has different concerns, questions, and feelings. They all have different experiences. You could have really two opposite ends of the spectrum, and it could just be like, you know, one child's grieving like this and the other's like this, and it can be so different. We re-experience loss throughout different changes and different things. The loss could have happened 5 years ago, and it's like all of a sudden this one thing triggered them, and they're just like, it's back in the forefront of their mind again. They can't shake it. So, being honest, death is often the beginning of a series of changes, and relationships with the deceased are seldom all positive or negative. So it's usually a mix of both. We usually feel a mix of positive feelings and negative feelings. And it's okay to process the negative feelings. Sometimes people think it's not because we want to remember the person as a good person and they did all these good things, but your children may have seen something that like wasn't so great, or like maybe it was all great, and that's okay too. But usually there's something in there where they're like, oh, I didn't like that they did this thing, or you know, one time I saw grandma yell at grandma yelled at me, or grandma yelled at someone else. You know, that just kind of stuck with them, and it doesn't mean grandma was a bad person. It just means the experience changes. So this is a list of Fernside Services. I'm not going to dive too deep into explaining each one, but I am going to explain what the best steps are for a partnership with the Down Syndrome Association, because I feel like this is going to be really important, I think, for serving your children as well. So we have our evening program. That's our program that goes all year round. Well, it goes September through June. It's about to transition back in person. You know where your child is kind of on of what their abilities are and how well they can connect with other kids. If that's the best program for them, we'll walk you through the steps to start participating in that program. This past year, 2 years, we've been doing Zoom. Maybe that wasn't the right option. We have some children with Down syndrome in the Zoom groups. We serve kids on the autism spectrum, Down syndrome, different disabilities in the evening program. So if their communication, if they are really verbal and you think it'd be a right fit to put them in a group, an in-person group, you can absolutely do that. If you feel like, oh, I feel like that's not the right fit, and it's better, we could actually start a group here with other individuals who have Down syndrome. It would be a shorter term group, but we would dive in for like 4 to 6 weeks and do a group. We usually
How long are your groups normal?
So all the groups in the evening program are twice a month for an hour, and they're September through June. But if we did like a concentrated group here with a group of individuals, it would be 4 to 6 weeks, probably for like 45 minutes. I'd say it's probably the best timeline. Sometimes there depends on the group. Sometimes it's 4 weeks, sometimes it's 6 weeks. It just depends. But basically, once the need is identified, you know, we always meet everyone where they're at. So we're happy to come here. One thing I know we've done a lot of a crisis program is when someone dies unexpectedly, we'll come out and we can either do like a one-time processing, or we can do like a series of group processing meetings, and those go up to 4 meetings. Because when individuals are in crisis, it's about helping them figure out how to process and start to move forward in the initial weeks. We actually just this past year did a group, a DDS group with Hamilton County, and they just had lost their friend. It was a group of adults with disabilities, and they lost their friend, and they were really sad. And we came out. They just wanted one time. We did a graffiti board with them, which is just a big board, and it has a word on it. The word could be worried. What are you worried about? You know, related to the death. Just pick one word. So we could even do that. You know, we do our crisis groups too with like organizations. Like if there was an individual who's part of this organization who died, we can come out and do like a group process. So those are some different options. We've got different books and different resources and publications as well that I have up here. One that we also have, which I'm kicking myself for not bringing a couple copies because I definitely should have. I don't want you all to have, like, sometimes organizations buy these in bulk, but since all of you are here today, I'm like, oh, I should have brought some workbooks for you all to take home. It's a workbook that there's like different pages for different things, like processing special days, which could be anything from Christmas to Valentine's Day. Processing like the anniversary of the death, or like what happens when you go to work, what happens when you go to school. I'll leave this information with all of you, but I'm feeling very called to like grab a stack and like drop them off.
I was gonna say, we can fix them up too.
Drop them off because I really like when people buy them in like bulk. Like if you're getting 100 of them, you know, you have to purchase them. But I'm like, I can drop some off. I should have brought some. I'll drop some off. They probably like within the next week or so and give you a stack because this is just a great thing to like, you know, if they're talking about the death and you want to give them something to start working on, you could do this. And you could even all like here, once you have a copy, you can make copies of like the worksheets and send them home with people too. So that's a great activity. I know I've done a lot of talking, but I do want to share this one last activity before I open it up for questions. But this is a really popular Fernside activity. It's called a crack pot, and it basically shows that when someone dies, sometimes it feels like our pot cracks, you know, we're in all these pieces. So we actually let kids hit it with a hammer. Depends on the age group. It's always with adult supervision. Sometimes they get to use the hammer, sometimes they don't. It just depends on the group. But they decorate the inside of their pieces with things that make them sad, and the outside are things that help them, and then they glue it back together. The hard part is gluing it back together. It's really hard. I had some groups where it's like, man, this is really not coming together. We have like tons of these in our office though. It's really a nice family activity. If you want to honor a special person or make a pot in honor of your person and have it on display, but it's just a nice thing that resembles that we can put our pieces back together, but then we don't have to do it alone. And depending on, you know, there's different activities we could also do, like this, like puzzle. We have like little miniature puzzles, like that's also symbolism of like put your pieces back together, then they come apart and put your pieces back together. So it's basically like a puzzle, which is what our group is. It's just a big puzzle. And we have to figure it out, and we have to figure out what our kids need and what's going to be best for them. But I know that can also be really scary too. So like I said, don't feel like you have to be an expert. You don't have to be. But I want to open it up for questions and see if anyone has questions about the developmental stages or anything.
In your experience, the eating programs have the kids, kids with disabilities mix well with the typical kids? Do
Yeah.
They do okay together?
Mm-hmm. I actually facilitated a group with, it was a pretty typical group of kids, and I had a child with autism. And sometimes what we can do is bring in an extra facilitator, because sometimes that individual might need like another facilitator just to kind of like work with them. So usually our groups have 2 facilitators. Actually, this upcoming year we're adding 3. So if you feel like extra support would be necessary, we can always pull another volunteer in. But it also might not be. I mean, I'd say it's better off to just like give it a try and see how they do. And it also kind of depends on where you think they're at on that scale of like, okay, I think they really do good with sixth graders. Like, let's try and do sixth graders. Our little girl who came to camp this year, she had like a great time. And she's just like one of the other kids. You know, she put a bathing suit on, she's in the pool, doing all the activities, and just had a blast. And then, yeah, like I said, I think it's just unique to every child. But in the experience, like I said, I haven't done a group specifically with a child with Down syndrome, but I have had kids with other disabilities in my groups. And based on what their needs are, you know, it could require an additional volunteer, or maybe it's just, you know, we have to do things a little bit differently in the group. But I'd say so. That they can definitely interact pretty well, and especially for the ones who are more social. I've worked with some that are like really, really social, and then some who aren't as social, but it works either way. Because honestly, like, I'm more back to my situation with the child I worked with autism. Like, there were other kids who shared just as much as he did, or like just as little. Like it, you know, the sharing was like up and down, but it wasn't really that different. He definitely connected pretty well with that group. So, do you have any other questions? Okay.
Katie, I just want to thank you. I love what you guys do, not just for the Down Syndrome Association, but just an incredible gift and resource to our community.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah.
You guys are doing very, very, very important work.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Jim. You all as well. Like I said, we're so happy to partner with all of you. And Missy, I keep going back to our conversation because I was the one who took your call, and my heart goes out to you because it hurts me when it's like you're looking for a resource, and when we're not the right fit, I'm like, okay, what can we make the right fit for Jenna? Like, where does, you know, and that's why I'm like, I think we can get a group going here. I think that would, you know, if it would help them, and I think it would, to be with other kids like them and to process their grief, like, this is exactly where that partnership comes in. And I think maybe the evening program, when we go back in person, if you want to try it, I think everything is worth trying. It's worth, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And we've got resources for other counselors too, to try. Again, we want to meet you where you're at and find that need. Like, I just keep going back to that. Like, it stinks when it's like, oh, you know, I don't think we'll try that right now. And I'm like, oh, I want it to work so bad. Like, how can we make it work? And I think that we can. I think that we can with the partnership and connecting with each other. And I think that's really important. So we, my staff member, Sally, who's going to be here today, she didn't come tonight. It ended up just being me, but she does a lot of work with our CBS groups, and she actually had her brother-in-law had Down syndrome, so her husband's brother, and they were very close, and she holds all of you very close in her heart as well. So, and I talked to her about doing a group, and she's like, I would love to, like, just let us know, you know, give us a call. There's enough. It's usually 3 to 4 is a good sized group, but she's like, I would absolutely love to do it. So, but that's
what is a question I would have. What would be the critical mass range for group, you know, kids or even young adults with Down syndrome?
I'd say with Down syndrome, we probably want to keep it probably no bigger than like 5. And if we had to do multiple groups, we definitely could.
3 to 5.
I'd say 3 to 5. Just because it will, you know, it's different than just some of our typical kids groups might go up to 10, but I think this population will be better served with like 3 to 5. I think a smaller group is going to be better. We usually ask that there's at least 3 to 4 for like a good sized group. But I'd say 5 would be good. And there's always capacity to do multiple groups too, and like,
But we can do multiple groups over the course of a year.
yeah, like, hey, this, you know, and typically, in at least within a year, usually kids only participate in it like once in a year, just so that whoever needs it, like everyone can kind of get a chance, if that makes sense. But we're definitely able to like walk through that and see what will work best to serve the population. Because again, we want to meet you all where you're at. We want to meet the kids where they're at, and do what we think will be best for them too.
That sounds great.
So I assume for your typical kids in the evening program, you said it was September to June.
Mhm.
I assume they can come in and out, like they join whenever there's a need, and then when they feel like they're good, they step out.
Mhm. Yeah, we actually have families that will like come back even years later, like their kids could have been younger when the death happened and now they're older and they come back too. But they come and like enrollment for the evening program is always open. We don't turn anybody away. It's always, we're enrolling people right now to start in January. So we're always taking families. Now, if we did groups through here with the Down Syndrome Association, we could do it anytime. We could do it in the summer, we could do it whenever. There wouldn't be, a school timeline. It could go all, if you wanted to do groups, 3 groups a year or whatever it might be, that would be anytime. I think it's encouraging too, like our summer camp program, like depending on the abilities of your children, like our kids, like I said, we've had kids with Down syndrome come out to camp, and the camp, all of our services are free of charge. I hadn't mentioned that yet. Camp, everything, it's all free of charge. And camp is neat because it's like doing like normal outdoor activities or like camp activities, and like all the kids are grieving, but it's like we can just like be kids, we can just like have some fun and not think about the sadness for a moment, but we also do support groups while we're there. But it's really cool to be in a different environment and just have a new experience with other kids who are grieving. All right.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.